joined by ESPN NFL analyst Dan Orlovsky, whose appearances on One Bills Live are presented by Caesars Sportsbook, an official mobile sports betting partner of the Buffalo Bills. Happy New Year, Dan. And as we begin here, yes, not a whole lot sexy about Bills-Patriots this week. The game means nothing for the Bills. It might actually mean more for the Patriots in terms of who they decide to roll out. Are you sitting Drake May? Are you playing Joe Milton? But in the grand scheme of things here, what can the Bills maybe tidy up or sharpen up, even without the full complement of their starters in the game, to keep themselves ready, so to speak, for Wild Card Weekend?
Chris, I don't want to lie to you. I just don't believe that there's a ton. I think that this is something that has, we've talked about for a couple of weeks, was the ideal situation once the number one seed no longer was in play, was getting to this point as an organization saying, okay, the guys that have the nicks, you can only sit so many guys. There's that reality. So right. The guys that have the nicks, they're able to sit and get healthy. And guys that have a lot of wear and tear on their bodies, they're able to sit and get healthy. And there's the opportunity for some of the younger players to get reps. I'd say Cole Bishop probably is a player that comes to mind that can really use some more live game reps, when it comes to just seeing situations and communication on the back end. But I really believe that this is a week where you start to prepare for the potential opponents, and as much as you can as a staff and your players. It's kind of like that time in between the end of the preseason and the start of the regular season. You're really just focused on staying as sharp as you can and trying to get, some Keon Coleman some reps that, will be very meaningful into the playoffs.
So we had this conversation just before we went to break this last segment about how these teams are starting to get their ducks in a row offensively. I named off a ton of teams. Well, it was the Chargers, it was the Bills, it was the Giants, it was the Buccaneers, the Eagles, the Lions. All those teams scored 40 this last weekend. And then there's another 5 or 6 teams who scored 30, and some of them in losses. What's that say about, this coming into the playoffs? And I get this too. I've always said some of the best games in the league are played on Wild Card Weekend. Because they sprint to the finish, and that emotion carries into the preparation for the next week, and they give their best effort on Wild Card Weekend. Is that a thing to you?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. Number one, the longer you play in the season and you're a playoff team, the more as a coach you understand what you're good at and what you're not good at. And you've figured that out, and so you start to, during the season in September and October, if your game plan is 100%, you're still trying to figure out how much of that percentage is, an RPO game or a play action game or a drop back game or what types of runs you're actually good at executing that year. And as the season goes on, your game plan starts to go from 100% question mark, I guess, to 90% to 80%. And then it starts to flip. And as you get into November, December, so I think you have a much greater understanding as a coaching staff of who you are as a football team, the things that you're good at and the things that you're not good at. You obviously start to major much more into things that you're good at and not good at. The second thing is what your players are good at, the specific roles and things that you want to get your guys to do or ask your guys to do or put them in those situations. That grows as the season goes on. The urgency at the end of the season, when you are playing for the 1 seed, or you're playing to secure the division title, you're playing to, get into the playoffs, that daily urgency and that hyper focus and meetings and on the practice field all gets elevated and ramped up during the season and obviously into the back end of December. And that's why that wild card weekend, you're often getting about as good a football as you're going to get from basically everybody. And I don't want to say as healthy, but in many ways healthiest that you will get some teams just because of the opportunity that they may have week 18, Buffalo not having to play anybody. So, it's going to be a very fun, obviously opening weekend of football, depending on the matchups.
I know we often talk to you about offensive football, but I do want to discuss Bills defense with you a little bit because, there are fans that have their share of concerns about, the consistency of the run defense here. We know the Bills are 25th in yards per carry against, 4.7. That's a fat number. And then even their pass defense, while I think it's gotten better, it ranks 22nd in the league, and they can't get off the field on third down, as we know, all season long, 29th in third down defense. But what they do exceptionally well is take the football away, and it's been a gigantic equalizer for them. They're tied for the league lead in takeaways with 31, and they have the best turnover margin in the football because the offense has been responsible with it. I'm going to just throw a couple other numbers here. 7th in the league in tackles for loss. Sack total is good for 10th most in the league, and they're 11th in quarterback pressures. How much does that group up front have to really put their foot on the gas here in the postseason if this defense is to help them win games?
It'll be the backbone of this run defensively. There's no question about it. I mean, we often talk about these playoff runs, and Chris, we talk about them in almost the silo focus of the quarterback performance. If you had to go through the AFC and you had to ask, if this team goes on that run and gets to the Super Bowl, wins the Super Bowl, who's the guy that you think has that 1 month, best month of his career? You could very much so make the case it would be Greg Rousseau for Buffalo. You could absolutely say, can he go on that run? You can say it for Ed Oliver as well. So I think that front is huge. The run defense, I don't want to say that it's a concern. Matchups are going to be massive. I would say that, like, matchup wise, a team that I wouldn't want to see if I were Buffalo would be the Chargers, candidly, opening weekend. And I don't know how the matchups could fall, if it could work that way or not, just because they never give up negative plays on offense. They're unbelievably efficient offensively. They don't give the ball away. They're unapologetic about the style that they play. That would be the team that you sit there and go, I mean, obviously everyone's very good. That would be the team, just strength on strength, not exposing of the weakness. That would be the team that I would certainly have reservations on.
Yeah, fortunately, it can only be the 5 or the 6, the Chargers, so they would not meet Buffalo in round 1 anyway.
That's a win.
Yeah.
That's a win. So you're talking about it would be Denver, Miami, or Cincinnati?
That's correct. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, so like Denver, Miami, Cincinnati. Obviously, Cincinnati can get hot as anybody. Miami, divisional opponent. Denver is an elite defensive unit when they're playing their best. But I would think that Buffalo would feel confident about no matter what the matchup, winning that game. And then obviously, I just talked about the Chargers. Pittsburgh, I think Buffalo matches up well with against. Houston, I think Buffalo matches up well with against. Baltimore is as good as anybody in the NFL when they play their game. So I do think that the run defense in that front is going to be really big to make sure that teams aren't able to dictate defensively, on a consistent basis.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when you get down to it, it is about matchups, and plus, like you said, at this point of the season, you know exactly which matchups are catastrophic for you, and also game winning for you. How do you keep the catastrophic matchups from beating you, and how do you get the ones that you want, particularly when you're under the play clock? You're gonna how do you do that on game to game, play to play basis?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's the obviously philosophy is, and this is an organization that in many ways believes that they are very confident and capable of doing the things that they do. That their process has gotten them to this point. I think offensively, Steve, they match up well with basically any defense. We've watched this team offensively kind of do whatever it wanted for the great majority of the season outside of that Baltimore and Houston stretch. So I think that, the focus point, if I would, be in that meeting room with this team and Sean McDermott, I would imagine that the focus point is, being very clear with what's gotten them here, what habits, what daily routine, what process of football has gotten them to this point, and really hyper focusing and reaffirming These are the trademarks, the benchmarks, the traits as a team, as a unit, and then as a team that have gotten them to this point. And how can they even advance that? How can they be even more efficient on offense? How can they run the football even more consistently on offense? How can their yards after the catch be even better on offense? How can Josh be even a greater decision maker defensively? How can they shore up some of the run stuff with some of their gap integrity on a consistent basis? How can they play the perimeter run a little bit better? How can they communicate defensively with maybe some of their disguises and rotation so it happens just a fraction of a second later? That's why I mentioned maybe Cole Bishop getting some time as well, because you just never know. So there's definitely things that habits and process wise that you can focus on to avoid a lot of the hiccups that sometimes happen in playoff football.
Naturally, the league MVP conversation has persisted and will probably continue to persist until we get to Super Bowl weekend. The question for you, though, concerning Josh, what stands out maybe for you about this season for Josh as opposed to previous seasons when he was very much in contention before?
One, I think he's doing just as much with less. And then two, obviously valuing the football at a significantly higher rate while also producing at the same rate. You know, there's no question about it. He's had his best season as a decision maker. I think it's been his most accurate season when it comes to throwing the football exactly where he wants to. I mean, you're watching the Amari Cooper touchdown. It's a great catch. It's also thrown the only place it can get thrown. The Keon touchdown when he throws it up to a spot and Keon goes and gets it. There's a little bit of luck involved in that. I could also go back to that slot fade by Keon that he throws to him. That's elite and perfect, and it gets called back for a penalty. So I think it's the best ball placement season he's ever had. I'll share this with you guys. So I obviously stepped in a little bit of mud when I said, MVP vote is over. It's Josh's. And that was premature. I was caught up in the emotion of it. Everyone knows I'm a fan of Josh, just like I'm a fan of Patrick and Lamar and Joe and plenty of guys. But I was thinking about this exercise this morning. I'm going to either share it on social media today or tomorrow. And this is not to knock anybody. But if we took the teams that are in the AFC and NFC playoffs, and I'm putting Denver in right now as the 7, just assuming they win. If we took those 7 teams in the AFC and 7 teams in the NFC, and you had to ask yourself, if you took the quarterback away from the offense and you just had the 10 other offensive guys in the scheme, the play caller, what offense do you fear the most in the playoffs? And what offense do you fear the least in the playoffs? Okay. And if you did that for both conferences, take the quarterback away. I would tell you in the AFC, in my opinion, if you took the quarterback away, I would say Baltimore would be the offense I fear the most. And probably Kansas City would be the offense that I fear the least. I think that lends itself to explaining a little bit to how impressive the season has been for Josh. Josh has had a great season. Lamar Jackson has had an unbelievable season. Joe Burrow has had a remarkable season. The MVP has gotten to be a little bit of a you pick a side award type of thing, but you got to look at the value, and statistics can say whatever they want. You have to actually watch every single snap and how it looks to really evaluate how much value that person brings.
There is something in this league. We were having this conversation earlier in the week or yesterday about, we're in the midst of a run here. We got Pat Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson. You got Joe Burrow. You got some guys. Matt Stafford's still in the league. Jared Goff. You got Jaden Daniels. You've got Jalen Williams. You got some young guys. Bo Nix coming up. Drake May. When I played, it was Marino and Kelly and John Elway and Montana. So this atmosphere of quarterback play in the league
is
maybe deeper than we have ever seen at any other era in history.
Steve, I've said that for a year, and that's why I disagreed with what Tom Brady had said at the beginning of the year, I think, or maybe during the summer, when he said quarterback play is I don't want to put words in his mouth, maybe as bad as it's ever been or not good. And I said I disagreed with that. I thought that one, quarterbacks are more talented than they've ever been. Two, there's way more really good ones. Back in the day, there was that handful, it felt like. Now there's, every time you say, well, Josh Allen should win MVP, someone goes, well, no, it should be Lamar Jackson, or should be Joe Burrow, should be Patrick Mahomes, should be Jaden Daniels, should be Sam Darnold, should be Jared Goff. I mean, you got quarterbacks having MVP caliber seasons by the dozen, it feels like. And I think that speaks volumes to how good these guys are and how remarkable they are. And we've watched quarterbacks have seasons similar to some of these guys and clearly win MVP because they were clearly the guy that had performed the best. And I think that's one of the things that's so unique about this one this year is while one of these guys has had an unbelievable season, it feels like there's 3 or 4 that have had equally as unbelievable seasons. And it does speak to how well those guys are playing.
Yeah, Josh, the thing that to me sets Josh apart is his scoring ability. I mean, nobody touches him when it comes to touchdown production. I mean, he is a scoring machine. I mean, our PR staff put this out today. 1 game left in his 7th season this year, and he's going to play a series and exit just to keep his start streak alive. With 1 game left in his 7th NFL season, he already holds the record for most total touchdowns in a player's first 8 seasons. That's more than Mahomes, more than Manning, more than anybody, and he hasn't even played a game in his 8th season yet. He is a touchdown machine. I mean, when it comes to just scoring points, he's like the Michael Jordan of the NFL.
Yeah. And Chris, that's not negating or taking away from anyone else's performance. Right. Like 2 things can be true. And so I think people very clearly know how much I admire his game. Again, along other guys. But I do think that his case for MVP is probably as strong as it's ever been.
So what do you give us an idea about if you take these guys, if you clear the decks and you talk about Offensive Player of the Year and some of the other awards that are out there?
There you go. I mean, that's the thing. I said this yesterday, Steve. I said there's probably, again, 10 guys that you can make the case for, right? That and most years it'd be like, oh yeah, they're no brainer. There's probably 4 that are going to be in the highest of conversation for most voters would be my guess. It would be Josh, Lamar, Joe, and Saquon. MVP and Offensive Player of the Year are going to take up 2 of those. So that means 2 of those guys are going to be disappointed, frustrated, upset, ridiculously snubbed in some way. I don't know who the 2 are going to be. MVP, I really believe this. If Cincinnati gets in, I do think it's going to be hard for voters not to look at what Joe Burrow's done and say, oh my gosh, Lamar is having a historically great season. I mean, he is doing things that are kind of ridiculous. We've just talked about Josh and the unbelievable value that Josh has brought. And that's the thing too. Offensive Player of the Year, by definition, is to celebrate the person who has had the best season. And I think statistically, that's a thing that you can point to and say, stats-wise says this person's had the best season. MVP is different. You really have to equate who you're doing it with and who you're doing it against and what you're being asked to do. And so Saquon might break a 40-year-old rushing record. So out of that group of 4 would be my guess for MVP and Offensive Rookie of the Year. Defensive Player of the Year is a little bit of an unknown as well. Kirby Joseph from the Lions leads the NFL, I believe, in picks with 9. Myles Garrett's got something like 13 sacks in 4 straight seasons. But I don't know if there's a defensive player that is clearly shown past somebody else. Jalen Carter from the Eagles as a defensive tackle has been a game changer. Zach Bond, their linebacker. So there's a lot of people in the mix, and it's another example of how great some of the individual performances have been.
Dan, thanks as always for the time. We appreciate it. We'll catch up with you next week and get ready for the postseason.
Happy New Year, guys. Thanks.